Hello, my friend. This is Joe Bakhmutsky, and welcome to Simplify Cancer podcast. Today I'm talking to Suzanne Chambers. And Suzanne is a psychologist who has been helping folks with cancer for many years. And she took all that knowledge and all that experience and put it into a fantastic book called Facing the Tiger that is specifically aimed at men dealing with prostate cancer. But most of the insights she shares in this book are universal. Suzanne is practical, down to earth, and profound. I promise you're going to love it. Suzanne, I know you've done so much more than writing this book, but please tell about yourself for a minute, about who you are, what you do, and what you're passionate about.
Sure. So my background is that I'm both a registered nurse and a registered psychologist, and I've done many things in my professional history. I started out as a registered nurse in intensive care, and that was a very dramatic profession. And then I ended up working for the Cancer Council in Queensland, working with people with cancer in the community and developing community-based support services. And it was really a journey of learning for me that started then. This was back in, I'm just thinking now, 1989, I started working with people with cancer. My best teachers were the people who'd had cancer themselves, who were very generous in sharing their stories with me. And the habit I got into was I would go away and learn what the professions and the research had to say, come to some conclusions about what might help people, and then I would bring it back to my community of people who had experienced cancer and share that with them and say, what makes sense to you out of this, and how would you use this information? And so it was a really collaborative process that developed my way of thinking over from all those years ago. So obviously that's a couple of decades ago, that informed how I think about coping with cancer and what I say to people with cancer when I'm trying to be of assistance to them.
That's fantastic, Suzanne, that you talk about it as a learning experience. And when you looked at the research and you tried to bring it into practice and get feedback from real life people, did you find that in terms of the research out there, that did it align with how people try to deal with it, in real life, so to speak?
I think it did. The way that I look at research is that having cancer is really confusing for most people because it's a shocking experience for most of us, and trying to make sense of it is really hard because you're distressed and you're anxious. And so the point of psychological research in this area, I always say, is to help us with a map. And so to help us go, that is why I feel this way. That is what this means. That's what's driving that. Therefore, some ideas for how I can help myself might be this. So from my point of view, if anyone is doing psychological types of research with people with cancer, they have to be very focused on being creative in finding solutions for people to help them in a difficult circumstance manage the best they can. Most people are doing the best they can, and most people do well, but sometimes you can get overwhelmed, and that's when having someone who's been able to put a bit more of an analytic frame on it can give you tips that you can try out and experiment with to see how you go and be open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of sounds like your approach is that you are essentially guiding people to find solutions themselves. Is that right?
Absolutely, because I think, I don't know about you, but the last thing, but mostly I need is someone bossing me about, and I do think people can be their own best friend, have to draw on their own inner resources, and no one knows you as well as you know yourself. So if you can have someone be a good sounding board for you, which can be a good friend, or it might be a health professional or a volunteer who helps you understand yourself a bit better, find within yourself your own solutions, people are more likely to stick to their own solutions. That's the fact of it. We know ourselves, we know what we like, and if someone can help us find what our strengths are, what our best coping resources are, I think that's a great way to go.
Yeah, that's incredible, Suzanne. So how would you suggest, that people go about doing that, perhaps on their own, or maybe, with their friends? How would you go about tapping into your own resources and finding solutions that unique to you?
So I think there's some knowledge that people can gain by getting information, and there is so much information available for people with cancer. If they're in Australia, they can ring the cancer councils. There's a 13 11 20 toll-free number people can phone. There's so much online that you can look up as well. The framework that I have learnt from people with cancer, again, that I've worked with, that seems to be most helpful is the stress and coping framework. So what that means is when cancer happens to you, it's a major life stress. In some ways, not that different to being in a car accident or having something really difficult happen to you where suddenly you feel threatened and the world seems different and you're not sure what to do. In a book I discuss this. You will react in a way as if a tiger has just walked in front of you. You'll have the flight or fight response. And it's hormonally driven, and we're built that way. We're built that way to help us survive. A lot of our reactions to things are instinctive. So if you understand that and you can understand why your body is acting that way, then that gives you some tips about specific strategies you can use that might be more helpful to you. I use an analogy where I say your approaches to coping are your toolbox, and you need more than one tool to fix a car usually, and you might need more than one tool for yourself. People have a tendency, we all do this, to have a particular way that we deal with difficulties. Some of us like to chat a lot. Some of us get emotional and express our emotions. Some of us like to hide away. Nothing wrong with any of that, unless it's not working for you or you're overusing one strategy. So the real tips are to be flexible, to be prepared to think creatively and laterally about how you might cope with the situation, to seek information so that you're well informed, and to be your own best friend in that sense, to not be self-critical about how you're doing, because in any difficult situation, we're all doing our best, we're all trying hard, we just might need a little extra help sometimes.
That makes so much sense, Suzanne. And one of the things that really helped me was going on and learning as much as I could about my cancer, learning all about the different paths it can go, learning all about treatment, and sort of becoming an expert in it, if you will. That gave me a lot of confidence to, first of all, feel comfortable about what's happening, and secondly, to ask informed questions when I was seeing a specialist. Do you find that is a good way to go about as well?
Absolutely. And I love the words you use, because you are the expert in your own illness. You know, you have to really trust your own instincts on that. And I see so often people that I'm working with cancer who just know so much about their illness because they get informed. And it really helps. It's good if you can try and get informed before you talk to the doctor, if that's possible, because it makes it more likely that you're going to really understand what he's talking about or she is talking about and be able to ask informed questions. There are lots of strategies that people will suggest, like write down questions before you go, take a buddy with you before you go to the doctor so that you've got an extra pair of ears. I think all those things are helpful. Work out with the doctor. When I need an extra question answered, who do I call for that? So setting yourself up so that you get home and you go, oh, I should have asked this. I really need to know that. You know how you're going to get that piece of information. But again, as I sort of said earlier, there are lots of services around now, much more so than when I first started working in cancer in the late 80s. There was really nothing around then. And in fact, back in those early years, we started running group educational programs over a 6-week period where we would get health professionals to come in and deliver talks for people, and we would have hundreds of people turning up. The room would fill out because there was not much online, there was not much on paper, there wasn't a helpline, not really back then, but now there are lots of places people can go. There's people like yourself, you know, so good to know what's out there. Be a canny consumer as well, though. You know, there are people out there who are suggesting things that are probably not helpful, so you've got to think, oh, what's the evidence for this? What's the likelihood that that really would be helpful? So you've got to be a bit discerning. And again, that's where often your doctor or a good friend can play a role in saying, you know, really, is that a sensible idea or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And do you see like this dubious advice out there? And if so, in what areas? And how do you separate, you know, the truth from something that simply isn't true?
Yeah. So If it sounds too good to be true, it's probably not true. That's a rule about everything, isn't it? That's a rule when I go to buy cosmetic. Is that really going to make me look 10 years younger? Not likely. That's not likely. That's a very girly example, but that's probably not going to be true. Is that really going to make me lose 5 kilos in the next week? Probably not. So sounds too good to be true, probably not true. Go to reputable websites, so Cancer Council Australia websites. There's the National Cancer Initiative in the US, good websites. The back of my book has a list for prostate cancer of reputable websites, but just put your skeptic hat on. Same goes for a whole range of things. I mean, as a person with cancer, the same as anyone else, your money is an important resource for you, and so is your time. So you want to make sure if you're investing your time and your resources into something, you want some good evidence that it's going to be helpful.
Absolutely. And Suzanne, I know that you spent a huge amount of time obviously working with prostate cancer patients and survivors. Like, what are some of the unique challenges for folks with prostate cancer? And what, I guess, are some of the things that we have in common universally, everyone who's facing cancer in some shape or form?
So cancer is a really stressful event for anyone, regardless of what cancer it is, really. No one wants to hear that word come out of their doctor, and it's distressing. And regardless of the type of cancer, you'll worry about, what does this mean for my future? What does this mean for my survival? How is this going to change my relationships? How is it going to change my ability to work, my ability to play? All of these things will go through a person's mind, because the world is changed from a diagnosis of cancer. Everybody's world is changed from a diagnosis of cancer. And some of the ways in which it changes will be sort of the same, in the sense that the world can somehow not seem like the safe place that it seemed before. I think we all act as if nothing bad's ever going to really happen to us and we're not going to get cancer. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of a normal, unrealistic optimism. But the reality is cancer is really common, So if we don't get cancer, someone in our family is likely to get cancer. But for anyone, it's a shock when that happens. If you then start looking at what things make it harder or not so hard, it's harder on you if you get cancer when you're young, because you're less established in life. You less expect to get cancer when you're young. If you've got dependent children, it's tougher because you've got all those financial responsibilities. If you're in a new relationship, it's tougher. If you don't have a lot of resources, if you're perhaps in a stage of life where you're struggling a little bit financially or in other ways, the added weight of cancer is extra hard. But having said that, regardless of your place in life, getting a cancer diagnosis is awful. Even when you're older, you don't expect to see that coming around the corner for most people. Where it differentiates more about the cancer itself is if your cancer's been picked up very early, obviously it's easier to be optimistic about that than if your cancer was picked up at a late stage, even though there are wonderful treatments for advanced cancer now as well. And then the type of side effects that you'll experience and how it's going to change your physical life is obviously, that's going to be really dictated by where is your cancer and what sort of treatments do you have. So are you having radiation therapy, or are you having chemotherapy or hormone therapy? And each of those things will have particular side effects that a person will have to cope with, and they vary by cancer type. So in prostate cancer, things that worry men are things like urinary incontinence, although it's much less common these days, problems with erections and sexual life. If men have more advanced disease and they're put on a hormone-blocking therapy, then that causes problems with muscles and muscle wastage, and a range of other things. And of course, for every cancer, it's different. For some cancers, like lung cancer, a particular issue that people with lung cancer and their carers face is stigma. We think of cancer as not stigmatized anymore, but some cancers are, and people with lung cancer often feel like folks think they deserve it because perhaps they smoked, or even if they didn't smoke, people assume they did. Some cancers are hard to talk about because they're so personal, so bowel cancer can be hard for people to talk about, and that makes it a bit tougher. There's all sorts of unique things that people might struggle with, although the core issue is being diagnosed with something that's potentially life-threatening.
Yes, that is so true, Suzanne. And it cancer also, cancer diagnosis also changes your self-image, the way you see yourself. Do you think that's true?
Look, I think so. It probably varies amongst individuals. I mean, I know when I talk to some people, they say, I feel like a stronger person than I was before. I feel empowered in different ways because of what I've had to learn. But other people don't feel that. They feel that this has left me not the same, not in such a good way, but I've learned to manage that. And then some people will say, I'm just the same person that I always was. So it's a pretty personal thing. And perhaps we can sort of think about this more broadly, that in life there are many difficult things that can befall us. We can lose a loved one, we can lose our job, we might end up in jail, God forbid, but the difficult things happen to
Yeah.
people. We might get divorced, we might lose a baby, all sorts of things can happen. And when these things happen to us, I guess I kind of think that they leave us with a mark that we have to learn to adjust to. And that can be really tough, to learn to come to terms with that and come to terms with, do I feel different and in what way, and how do I create my new self, I guess. People talk sometimes about, do you create a new self or do you become the same person? I think it's a personal journey, and we all do that. We do that differently. Most of us strive to try and find a meaning and learn something and put ourselves back together, and then we get on. But that's the nature of humanity, isn't it? That's the
Yeah.
humanness of us all. We all are out there struggling with different things, and sometimes that thing we're struggling with is cancer.
Absolutely, absolutely, Suzanne. And that's why I love your analogy of cancer, as a tiger, because it makes this experience feel real. It makes you feel, go through this physical fear, and it's like being sad and anxious. But as you say, reacting this way is very natural. But having this range of emotions is really not helpful to you. So when it comes to trying to deal with this, could you talk about why that is, and what are some of the key skills and strategies someone can use to deal with cancer in a better way?
Sure thing. The analogy of cancer as a tiger I got from urologists that I work with, who used to say to me, some prostate cancers are pussycats because they're very low grade and they're not ever going to do much, and some are tigers. And they used to say to me, we want to catch the tigers. And that kind of stuck in my mind about that. And then I thought, well, it is like a tiger in many ways because it's that physical threat. So the things to remember are, there are two broad categories. Well, they say the broad categories of coping with a major life stress and with cancer. One of them is what we call emotion-focused coping. So that's trying to deal with the sadness or the anxiety. So that could be crying, talking, running, trying to physically get that sense out of us. More of the stuff things that we do that's aimed at trying to relieve that feeling of sadness and tension. Then there is problem-focused coping, which is coping where we go, right, I'm going to get the information, I'm going to understand this, I'm going to find out what I'm going to do, and I'm going to apply a plan. Both are important, and you need a balance of both together. The third type of coping that has been incorporated into this model is meaning-focused coping, and so that's where we go, I've got to find a way in my head to understand how I can fit this within my life story in a way that feels okay for me. So it doesn't mean that I have to say, oh, it was a good thing, I'm glad I had cancer. Really, that is not a goal, because of course you don't want to have cancer, but it's trying to set it in a sense of coherence of your life, in a sense. So what I say to people is, these are all the different ways that you can cope, and you'll have your own preferences for coping. So for some people, crying and talking to friends might be so not on their list of things to do. They don't want to do that. And so I go, that's okay. What else can you do to get that emotion out? It might be that you might go for a walk in nature, or you might watch a movie or distract yourself, a whole range of things you can do. You might learn stress management techniques and try those. I worked many years ago, I worked on a program where I was doing therapy with women with gynecological cancer and their husbands. And part of my bag of tricks, so to speak, was to teach people deep breathing and relaxation exercises as a way, it's emotion-focused coping to try and reduce those feelings of stress. And It was my first lesson, I guess, about what blokes generally don't like to do. And so often the chaps would say, there is no way I'm going to do progressive relaxation. But what I will do is I'll go out and hose the garden and be quiet for a while. So finding different ways of distraction, of getting some peace, of trying to manage those emotions, while at the same time knowing that getting information and making a plan and making informed decisions can be helpful as well. But the key, again, is the flexibility. If you have one way of coping and that's all you do, that's probably not going to be that helpful in the sense. My example there is if you're in the doctor's office and he's trying to do an unpleasant procedure to you, like take blood or something like that, closing your eyes and imagining you're in Bali or somewhere else and fantasizing that you're somewhere else is probably a good way to dissociate from the unpleasantness of someone sticking a needle into you. But if you're in the kitchen and a family member comes in and wants to talk about the cancer, closing your eyes and imagining yourself in Bali is not going to be helpful. It's going to
it's not going to work.
Well, it'll get an outcome that might not be pleasant. So it's just try different things, be a bit playful sometimes, and give yourself a break. People are so judgmental about their own reactions and are thinking, I should be stronger than this. I shouldn't be upset. Well, stop doing the shoulding to yourself. It's okay to get upset sometimes, and you are doing the best you can. So don't judge yourself. Be kind and compassionate to yourself and be your own best friend.
That is so true. I guess we put so much pressure on ourselves to be this way or that. And you mentioned the third way, which is third way of coping, which is when you're incorporating, I guess, cancer as part of how you see yourself, not necessarily in a way that you're saying, oh, so great that it's happened. Could you talk about that a little bit? And is there a way to incorporate that into your daily life?
So I think it's one of those things where we call it, psychologists have a fancy name for everything, so that you all think that we're clever. Cognitive processing, the idea that when you have an experience at some level in your mind, you're working it through in your head. And I'm sure many people will recognize this experience where they've had something they can't figure out the answer to and they go for a long walk and suddenly, without even any apparent stimuli, the answer pops into your head because at some level you've been processing it and working it out. So I think coming to the point where you've made some meaning out of this experience is a matter of cognitive processing. Things that help processing are allowing yourself to be sad, not insisting that you be upbeat all the time, giving yourself permission to be sad. I think talking it through every now and again with someone. You don't have to talk about it all the time, but talking it through every now and again, you'll come to that point eventually. I know I had a very difficult experience for me last year when my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and she had a very advanced esophageal cancer, so she only lived for 6 months. And because I was so busy looking after her for the 6 months, I couldn't let myself process it because I had too much to do to look after her and make things the best that I could. And then I think it took me a good 6 months after that till I finally had worked it through enough in my head that I didn't feel angry anymore and I could talk about it in a reasonable way. And I think I'd come to a sense of peace about that. So the time frame for coming to a sense of peace about what's happened varies, but it's important to try and, we want to get to a sense of peace. We don't want to have this chip on our shoulder or this monkey on our back forever. So I don't have a recipe for that other than, allowing yourself to think, allowing yourself to be sad. Sometimes people find it helps to write stuff down, picking your mark for when you want to talk it through with someone, test out ideas about what you think this is, and allowing it to change. I know people who early on, for the first few years after their cancer, felt very tied up in their cancer identity and really saw, this is who I am now. I'm a cancer survivor and I'm going to have a very high profile doing this. And then after 5 years or 10 years or whatever, or 1 year, they decided, I'm done with that now and I'm moving on to a different primary identity. So no rules for what's right and wrong. just finding your path.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to hear about your mom, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know in the book, I think you talk in a very profound way about making decisions under stress. How does it work, and what can someone do to make better decisions when they're facing cancer?
So one of the ways I describe it in the book is that if you think of your brain as your cognitive just means thinking, it's your thinking workspace. And it's where you toss ideas around, we weigh them up. So when you're very anxious, your cognitive workspace or your thinking space becomes a bit more cluttered. It's harder to find things and it's harder to move them around. So and you're more prone to making a decision that you might later regret just because it's hard to think it through. So understanding that just means that if you're in an emotionally charged situation, like you've just been told that you've got cancer, most of the time there is no need to make an immediate decision. Remember that you're in shock, you're trying to how has this happened? What does it mean for me? There might be some circumstances where an immediate decision is needed, but that is not often the case. So sometimes the best decision is I'm not going to make a decision till I've had a chance to just settle down a little bit, talk to some friends, read some stuff, maybe get a second opinion and take some time with it. You can go through a structured process of writing down the pros and the cons. It sounds really boring and mechanistic. I know I had a friend whose partner was diagnosed with breast cancer and they were making a decision about chemotherapy. And I said to her, this is going to sound really boring, but I want you to go. I want you to write down the choices you've been given, and I want you to do the lists of the pros and cons, and then I want you to circle with red the things that you really want to avoid and then see how it looks. And these were, very intelligent people who kind of looked at me a bit funny but went, okay, and then later said, that actually really, really helped because the processes of writing that down and really weighing it up, it suddenly became really clear to us what decisions we needed to make. So that's a pretty straightforward process. These days, I was interested to read the other day, it's got a fancy name, they even now call it design thinking. Agree with that. But it's true. It's about being open to different solutions, thinking laterally, getting all the information and then weighing up the pros and cons, and then your decision will emerge.
That is so true, Suzanne. And it's good to hear that I have intuitively figured out design thinking when I was going through treatment, because I actually wrote down these options on a piece of paper, and I kind of weighed it up with all the the percentages of the likelihood. And I have to say it really helped me because it put things into perspective. I kind of go, oh, so when I look at it like that on a piece of paper, it actually makes it real,
Yeah, it's a good process to do for anything, really. If you're going to make a hard decision, writing down the pros and cons of each possible option. The trick is, too, to be really creative at the outset, so don't restrict yourself. Brainstorm any possible solution. There's a step before that, actually, I should say, which is getting clear about what the problem actually is, because sometimes you can think it's all about choosing treatment, but there may be something before that that's bothering you. So getting really clear about, first of all, what is the problem? Now, what are all the possible solutions to that? What would be the pros and cons of each? And then highlighting for yourself which ones matter to you most. Because values come into it. We're not computers. Our brains are not computers. And people rarely make a decision based just on the data. We'll have personal preferences for things. Some people will say, I've had men say to me, I don't care, I'm just never having radiation therapy, or I don't care, I'm just never having surgery. And they'll have personal reasons for that that often relate to other things that have happened in their lives. If that really is their feeling and that's what they want to go with, then they need to understand that. It's like when you think about, this is a bit of a blokey analogy, so when you buy a car and you buy a Holden, for example, did you buy a Holden because that was the best car, or did you buy a Holden because your dad always bought Holdens? Or like if you're buying anything that you buy, why did you make that choice to buy that brand? Often it's because in your family that was the talk about what's the best thing to buy. So it's a shortcut decision-making strategy. Now, we tend to do shortcut decision-making. There's nothing inherently bad about that. But sometimes we might want to just have a bit more of a process than just the shortcut.
Exactly, because we think that we are so rational when we're actually not.
That's right. But I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, but as you say, it's important to acknowledge that some of those things are irrational, and when you use a structured approach, it gives you some more confidence around what's happening. And I guess that could also help with dealing with like negative, intrusive thoughts that you get when you have cancer, that you can't just get out of your head. Like, is there anything we can do, Suzanne, to make that better, to make those thoughts go away or stop for a period of time, or what can we do?
So it's a really good point, because it is really common to have intrusive thoughts. So for people who don't know what that means, it's for example, you've been told that you've got cancer, and suddenly wherever you are, an unpleasant negative thought about the cancer just pops into your head and upsets you. And we hate them. Most people don't like these intrusive thoughts. But the trouble is, if you push it down and you suppress it, you make it stronger. If you tell yourself, I'm not going to think about white Holdens, I'm sticking with the car thing, you'll start thinking about white Holdens. Like, if you tell yourself, it's just a weird thing that happens. And so if when you get an intrusive thought, you go, oh, that's terrible, I must not think that, you will make it worse. Okay? So the first thing I would say is that intrusive thoughts like that popping into your head, it's just normal when something like this happens. And so don't say to yourself, I'm obviously not coping well, I shouldn't be having those thoughts. It's normal to have those thoughts. And those thoughts will be stronger if you've got an appointment with the doctor coming up, or if you put the TV on and someone's talking about cancer. There are things that might trigger those. It's part of processing the cancer experience. Now, if the intrusive thinking gets so bad, though, that you can't sleep, or it's really making you anxious all the time, then you can go and see someone to help you with starting to challenge those intrusive thoughts. So in cognitive behavioural therapy, and I go through this in the book, there's a process of saying, first of all, become aware of the thoughts that you're having that are driving your distress, because sometimes you're not even aware that they're there. So first of all, if you suddenly find that you're feeling distressed, check yourself, what's in my head, and write it down. So you keep a little bit of a diary about what your intrusive thoughts or your worries are that keep popping up. And that way then you can look at them and you can see if there's a pattern. Now, it's quite well known that there are typical patterns that people will have. So there's black and white thinking. It's got to be all this way or it's all terrible. There's that sort of black and white or all or nothing. Catastrophizing. Oh, if this has happened, therefore everything is going to be terrible. So that's another common pattern. Self-blame. Oh, this has happened, now it's my fault, and everybody's going to have a miserable life, and it's all down to me getting cancer. So there's a number of different patterns, and it's normal. Most of us do it. It's like those of us who, if you go to the car park and you can't see the car, you immediately either think it's stolen or you think I must have left it on a different floor. And the reality is the same for people who think either one. It's just that the person who thinks it's stolen gets really upset, and the person who thinks they put it on another floor just goes, oh, that's boring, I'll have to go and look somewhere else. Same objective thing happened. Emotional reaction to the two things is very different. So how you think does influence how you feel, and an awareness of that and understanding your own personal patterns so that you can then challenge that. It's like common thing that drives insomnia, for example, is people who can't sleep will often put their head on the pillow. Immediately their thoughts are full of negative worries about the cancer or about anything, and then they compound it by then negatively saying, and now I can't sleep and I won't sleep, and they get more anxious and they're less likely to sleep. So we can torture ourselves very well with our own thinking. And I do it too. It doesn't mean you're crazy. I do it overall. I'm the one. I think I usually would think probably the car was stolen. Although as I get older, I realise it's more likely I left it on the wrong floor. But it is. It's normal. But you can get a little bit of mastery with it. A different approach to the thoughts, which some people like, is mindfulness, which stems from Buddhist tradition and meditation. That doesn't work for me very well personally, but I know it works for other people. So you can try different things. You can try challenging your thoughts and replacing them with a helpful thought. So, oh no, I'm sure my car has not been stolen. I'm sure I left it on another floor, can immediately calm you down a bit. Same sort of thing with cancer. Or mindfulness is more about becoming aware of the negative thoughts and then seeing them just as a thought in the present moment and trying to separate yourself emotionally from the thought. And you can get people who can, if you want to learn how to do that type of coping strategy, you can get self-help materials about mindfulness, or you can get someone to teach it to you, or you can do cognitive challenging, the one that I've just talked about before. Another approach is to try and distract yourself to be more focused on what you're really trying to achieve, what your goals are. There are most psychologists and nurse counsellors will have a range of different types of strategies that if a person feels like it's getting on top of them a bit and they're not, they want to feel differently, then get someone to teach it to you.
Absolutely. And so, Suzanne, if you start writing things down and you notice a particular pattern that comes up, let's say it's self-blame or something else, how do you challenge it? How do you turn it around?
Yeah, so you ask yourself a question. Is this a realistic thought? And what is the evidence that this is a realistic thought? So I've got a pain in my toe. I'm sure the cancer has moved there. Okay, hold it. Let me pull back for a minute. What is the realistic evidence that that is the case? And so you can challenge that thought with fact. And then you can ask yourself a secondary question to say, is this a helpful thought to have? Is it helping me to think in this way? What can I practically do about the thing that I'm worried about? Is this helpful? So you're challenging the veracity and the helpfulness of that thought. And then you say to yourself, what's a better way to think? So replace that thought with a more helpful thought. It's not about, oh, everything's just fine, I'm just going to think positive. Not at all. It's about coming up with a way of answering yourself that helps you to feel better about the situation. So it might be, I've got that pain in my toe, but it's unlikely to be the cancer because I had my checkup last week and I was fine and I'll be seeing the doctor again. That's not helpful for me to think this way. What else can I focus on? I probably kicked my toe, or it's a bit of gout or whatever, and then direct my attention to something else that is more helpful.
Absolutely. And Suzanne, I know that cancer is incredibly hard, not just for people who go through it themselves, but also for their families. Like I know it's been incredibly tough on my wife and my mom. What would you say to someone who's supporting their partner or someone who's close to them through cancer?
So it's really tough being the partner or the family member because you have to put yourself second. There's no question about that. The person with cancer's got the cancer. Your job is to support them and look after them. But you have your own fears and worries and concerns, and it can be exhausting. So I think, first of all, you've got to understand that as a partner, you're doing the best you can. I think carers, partners, can feel negative about themselves if they're not able to relieve their person's fears and worries and can be unrealistic about what they can do. So you do the best you can to look after the person that you love who has cancer. But you remember that they're a person still too. It doesn't give them permission to just be awful all the time. They can be awful occasionally, but they're still a real person. That's what I say. I remember many years ago someone describing to me their relative who was being really, really difficult. The relative had cancer. And I listened to this tale and long story, and I said, what were they like before? And they said, just the same. And I said, here's your answer. Cancer's not going to turn into a better person overnight. So let's put it in context here and let's work it through. So in the end, we're all people, and we've got our own personalities. Partners need to self-care. They need to give themselves a break. They need to every now and again go, no, I'm going out and I'm doing whatever. And don't, I know in my own family, my family's full of people who've gotten cancer, and every now and again I've thought, oh, that's a bit much. You just got to negotiate that. Yeah. Be prepared to say, no, I can't do it. I've got to have a break. And the person with cancer, it's like a conversation, I suppose. It's like any relationship in a family where two different people. We're doing our best to look after each other. We'll have misunderstandings occasionally. You need to talk it through if you can. I say this in my book. I say, you need to talk about the cancer every now and again, but you don't have to talk about it all the time. So negotiating those things in some way and working as a team. Best thing people can do is work together as a team within the family and within a relationship.
Absolutely. And Susan, one thing that surprised me was that when I had cancer and I had, friends and people I knew would say, just let me know how I can help. And I found it to be the most useless thing that you can say to someone, because the reality is that now you're in effect asking me to come up with a way to ask you for a favor, right? Do you think that other better ways do you find to ask for help that would actually, encourage people to be more positive?
Yeah, I suppose it's a cultural thing, isn't it? That a lot of us come from cultural backgrounds where being stoic is the thing. We don't need help. We're just going to get in and we're going to march on through. And I'm a bit like that myself. I think part of that is our responsibility when we need help as a carer, as a patient, to know that there are people who are close to us who would love to help us but don't know what to do, and rather than feeling indebted to them, it's like a gift for them. They're watching you suffer. They want to help you. They don't know what it is that would be helpful. So I guess what I do with my friends when they're going through an experience like this, and I will, and we all are going to have these experiences, I will actually be explicit. I really want to do something to be helpful, but I'm not sure what that would be. Give me a hint and I propose things. Would you like me to take the kids out for the night? Would you like me to just pop over for a coffee? Can I cook you something? Do you want me to just stop speaking? Really have to be explicit person about what it is that I need you to do. And similarly, when I was the person who needed help, when I was looking after my mother, I learned to be very explicit about what it was that I needed. This is happening right now. It would be great if you would do X. And I had to be explicit because people couldn't read my mind. They didn't know what it was, what was happening with me, and then the sort of help that I needed was practical help. So I had some very, very fortunate. I have very good friends who were able to go, right, I can help you problem solve that problem, Suzanne, and work that through. So I think sometimes the problem is in ourselves, in that we're a bit of a stoic nation, in many ways. Not everyone, of course, it differs, but the tendency to think you've got to be strong. But sometimes being strong means being prepared to ask for help.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice, Suzanne, because sometimes you just need to be very straightforward and direct about what you need.
Well, that's it, whether it's saying, your neighbour's driving you crazy. Can I drag them off for you? What can I do? Really practical things. And some of that as a carer and a friend and supporter is just being observant. Notice what's going on and see if you can notice what's an external stressor that's affecting the person you care about and try and get that away from them if you can. And I always think practical help's a really good thing. Can I come over and shall we go for a walk together? What can I do?
Absolutely. And as you point out in the book, it takes special courage to really deal with cancer. And what could someone do to be more resilient through these tough times?
I think everybody who's coping with cancer has courage because they get up the next morning and they face whatever is in front of them. And I think we probably don't recognize our own courage often enough. It's really just all the things that I'm talking about. When you need support, seek it. If people offer you support and it would be helpful, take it. Look around you at what is available for you. Find things that give value and pleasure in your life and build them in. Do those things. Take time for yourself. If you think of your energy as like a bucket and difficult times leak water out of that bucket, you've got to put water back in. So find ways to fill your bucket.
Absolutely. In your experience, Suzanne, what are some of the most common misconceptions that people have around cancer?
That's a hard question, actually. What would I think there? I guess people fear cancer treatments, but cancer treatments can be difficult, but there are good supportive care services and treatments around to help you get through that. As a person with cancer, you should know that your opinion is important and what you want is important. You have a right to a second opinion and to ask questions, and if your doctor won't do that for you, get another one. You have a right to have care centred around your needs, and you might need to be assertive about that. And we all know now cancer is not contagious. And, that used to be, people used to shy away from people with cancer. That's not so much the case anymore. Try to find out information so that you can allay many of your fears and understand realistically what is ahead of you. Know that most people cope with cancer pretty well. They get through it. They move through it. The sky looks blue again. You can feel like I had a sister who had breast cancer when she was quite young, and even though I worked in the field, I was absolutely shocked, and I still have this memory of where I'm a bit of a catastrophizer. You might have picked that up, but I just thought my job was to look after her, and suddenly the world looked like a worse place for me, a dark place. But one day suddenly I noticed the sky was blue again, and I felt like that was like I was so sad. I felt like that sky was never going to be blue and beautiful again, but it was. It took some time, but it got there. So it can be hard sometimes to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but there usually is. Sometimes we just got to be a bit patient till we get there.
Yes, and Suzanne, you met a lot of folks going through cancer. Was there a moment that touched you the most?
Oh, do you know what I think? I think when I was first in the field and I was a mother of a young baby, and I found if I was working with parents who had small children who had cancer, I think that's because I could so imagine me in their place, and that must be one of the hardest things to face. But again, what I learn over time is how strong people really are and how parents can band to get through that experience. So, there's difficulty in life that comes to us, and no one cancer is better or worse in a sense, really, to the person that's experiencing that. It's what matters to them right now. Someone once said to me, Suzanne, suffering's not a competition. And I thought that was a great statement when I heard that, because I think at the time I was going, it could be worse. And they were saying, so what, you want your leg broken as well? So it's just a competition. And so people should remember that. We have a tendency to go, it could be worse or it could be better. It's your experience what matters.
That is so true. Suzanne, as a researcher, did you ever stumble upon something that made you go, wow, this is really special? I'm onto something here.
Do the special things I have learned have more been talking to people with cancer. So I'm a hardworking researcher, work hard at trying to make things better for people with cancer. That's the point of my research. But the most beautiful insights I get from people who've talked to me about what they're going through. And I suppose what that's taught me is just how different everybody is, how special people are, how in terms of their ability to look at what's happening to them, to be so, from my external point of view, I see people in very difficult circumstances who are doing such a great job, and I marvel at the ability of human beings to help each other and to look after their families. That's a special piece.
That's really amazing. Suzanne, thank you so much for your time and everything you've shared here. This is really fantastic. And Suzanne, if someone wanted to find your book, how would they go about it?
Okay, so the book is called Facing the Tiger, a guide for men with prostate cancer and those who love them. And it is published by Australian Academic Press, and so you can look them up online and buy a copy. It is also listed in Amazon in an electronic version that you can download to your Kindle or whatever. And you should be able to, if you Google Suzanne Chambers Facing the Tiger, you should be able to find it. But Australian Academic Press will have copies, and as I said, Amazon sells it as well.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. It's been profound.
Thank you so much for your time as well, Joe.